Tell me about your start as a sci-fi writer.
Sure. So I was born and raised in Ohio. I grew up in Delaware, Ohio, which is just north of here, and always wanted to be a writer, and wrote my first story in high school. I remember it. It's called The Opal Owl. It was a comic book story, and it was horrible.
Why was it horrible?
I'd never been to Los Angeles, and that's where I decided to set the story, which is probably a bad thing for a writer to do. I had no idea of the geography, no idea of the of how the city was laid out, or anything about it, which sometimes is good for a writer to not know anything about something that they're writing about, but usually it's probably a bad thing. Most of my stories now end up being written where I'm living, or where I lived in the past, and that's why my current series, which started with The Walls of the Universe and is now being followed up with my latest book, The Broken Universe. Both those books are set in Ohio, or actually in parallel versions of Ohio. So
why are parallel versions of Ohio so popular with science fiction writers? What is wrong with Ohio that there has to be a parallel version that you hope is better?
I didn't know that it was popular with other writers.
What made you go into sci-fi?
I read quite a bit of science fiction as a teenager. In Delaware, Ohio, there were several books, 3 bookstores. There was the Little Professor bookstore. There was Brad's Bookshelf, used books and comic books. And there was the News Shop, which had magazines and comic books and lots of wonderfully smelling books. So I was at those bookstores all the time, reading, devouring everything that I could find, every cheap used paperback that I could find. I was reading it, and as many writers find, once you read enough of it, you feel, I could do that. Okay. I could write.
When did you start feeling that you could do that? What age?
I was in 10th grade. I took a creative writing class in high school and wrote my first story, and continued to write stories after that. The interesting thing about that class is the teacher made us submit the story, and writing short stories has that whole process of packaging it up, mailing it, sending it off somewhere, and then waiting and waiting. It's a very daunting task when you start out. And I'm glad that my teacher said, go ahead and do it, because it came back with rejection, but the whole process happened. And so the process was then familiar, and I wasn't scared of that process. And so the idea of writing stories and trying to publish them was not an alien thing to me, or, well, it actually was an alien thing because I am a science fiction writer, but it wasn't a hard thing for me to do. And I continued to submit stories all the way through college, and not very much success until I went started to live in Pittsburgh, which was my first job after graduate school, and I found a writer's workshop there, and that's the workshop where I learned the craft that I needed to be a writer, and I started to sell stories at that point. My first story was in realms of fantasy. It was called The Burning Man. It was a story. It was a fantasy story, so it wasn't even science fiction at the time. It was a fantasy story about a man cursed by a wizard to burn 1,000 years. The funny part about that is they did not publish the last sentence in the story. And so I started getting a lot of emails from readers saying, how does this story end? How does this story end? And I'm like, well, at least I know they're reading it. And then I thought, well, if I knew it was going to be a sequel, I would have written more for the second half, because it was basically one single line that they had dropped off. And
that must be a very important line. Do you mind repeating it here?
I cannot remember what it was, but I had a contest at the time on my online journal. I said the last line was cut off the story, so here's the top 10 list of alternate ending lines for this story. And so I made it a joke, but I have to say it was a little bit heartbreaking to have my first professional sale truncated,
you seem
severed.
to have gotten over it, though.
I've gotten over it. It makes a good story now. Mm-hmm. And I was very well treated by Realms of Fantasy. It was a very professional magazine, and the art that they gave it was fabulous. In fact, I even bought a print of the art, and it's hanging in my hallway at home, because they did a good job with that.
When you do write science fiction, what is your process?
I am not a thorough outliner or a thorough plotter beforehand. I generally have a broad outline of where I'm going. If it's a short story, I usually know how I want it to end and some beats along the way. If it's a novel, I will broadly outline where I'm going just to keep myself on task, but I'm not a detailed plotter.
Okay.
I will let it go and see where it goes.
How often are you surprised by where it goes?
My wife can hear the cackles coming up from the basement quite often when I do something
But
interesting.
not a chainsaw, just the cackles.
Sometimes.
Okay. What will you do at your OSU bookstore appearance?
I'll do signings, I'll talk about my book, and possibly do a reading, and give away, hopefully I'll have some giveaways.
Okay. What kind of giveaways are the specialty?
I like having magnets. I have magnets, and also I'm going to give away the giant poster board that the publisher is sending over. So.
Okay. But no giant pictures of Paul Melko. No.
I hope not. I think that would be less of a prize and more of a
a consolation prize.
Mm-hmm.
So you were talking earlier about having a online journal. Are you somebody who's really in touch with your fans?
I am not much of not much contact with my fan base, if there is even one out there.
Okay.
I have a website. I have a live journal. I have Facebook, but I haven't exploited that particular media to much extent, and I doubt if I will.
Okay, why is that?
I have a wife with 4 kids. I have a full-time job. I have many hobbies, and I write as well. And I've felt that the value. I mean, I could spend that extra time to create an online presence and do marketing in those media, but it's just one of those things that hasn't reached above the threshold of everything else that has to be done.